She was so frustrated. In her anger, she hurled the medicine bottle against the wall, tore the irate letter from the teacher in half, and stuffed it in her child's backpack. She was so confused. She knew her daughter like the back of her hand, so the claims that she was a troublemaker came as a surprise to her. She had no idea that a computer test would reveal how completely wrong they were. Nally Sanchez and her family were no strangers to life's hardships. They had a limited amount of schools and jobs to choose from as they resided in a low-income area. But that was not Nally's only concern. She was concerned about her daughter, Adara, who displayed strange behavior at the age of 3. Adara's behavior grew increasingly odd. She had a strange way of doing things, and she could speak in full sentences, which was unusual for a 2-year-old. She also had an obsession with puzzles. However, when Adara turned 3, that's when Nally discovered something truly wasn't quite right with her daughter. She wasn't communicating with her in the way she was supposed to. Her obsession on particular tasks grew even stronger. As Adara's mother, Nally could not help but notice everything about her daughter. She'd have countless sleepless nights worrying about Adara's minor variances in behavior from other children her age. Nally needed answers, so she took her daughter to a doctor. There they finally discovered the truth. Her young daughter had Asperger's syndrome. Nally held her sweet daughter for hours, fighting back her tears. Nally was not bothered by her daughter's diagnosis, but rather how the world would respond to it. Her starting school was just as horrible as she anticipated it to be. Children mocked her daily, calling her horrible names. She would come home with swollen red eyes. It broke Nally's heart to see her daughter like this. Nally and her husband watched helplessly as their young daughter fell into a deep depression due to what was happening at her school. It did not sit right with Nally that her 7-year-old daughter hated life. She was too young to be dealing with these struggles. The teachers would repeatedly remark that she wasn't paying attention in class, sending her home with angry letters to show her parents. Instead of penalizing her, they took a different approach. Nally and her spouse were ill to their stomachs from the nasty notes the teacher sent home. It didn't feel like the teacher was writing about their daughter at all, but rather someone else's child. Then Adara's teacher pointed out yet another set of unanticipated behaviors, which presented them with yet another major stumbling block. The teacher stated that Adara struggled to stay awake during her daily classes, which resulted in her napping in class. Nally would inquire as to why, but her daughter would simply shrug it off. Nally and her husband questioned their daughter about her behavior several times, but she refused to answer. She stayed in her room instead, avoiding them as she did not want to get in trouble. She acted as if she didn't want to say anything. Nally was out of options, and so she came up with a plan. Nally asked the teacher if it were possible to set up a camera in the classroom to monitor what was going on. Fortunately, the teacher agreed. They also installed a camera in Adara's room to observe how she occupied herself throughout this period. The results surprised everyone. With puzzled expressions spread across their faces, Nally and her husband watched the footage of their daughter in class. The video started with their kid playing around at her desk and kicking her feet back and forth, but things were about to get a whole lot more intriguing. The next was staring off into space and only snapping back to reality when the teacher would angrily tell her to pay attention. It seemed the medication the doctor had prescribed to treat her Asperger's syndrome wasn't working, but the pharmacist at their local CVS said that there was no reason it shouldn't be working. Something was very wrong. Nally pulled her daughter into her lap and looked over the video again. This time she tried to get Adara to explain what she was doing, but it wasn't working. Adara looked at the video and looked down. She seemed unwilling to pay attention until a lesson on numbers popped up. That's when something finally sparked. Adara sighed and started to trace her fingers along her mother's arm like she was writing something. "What are you doing?" she asked. Adara shrugged again. "Numbers," she said. Maybe her daughter really did know what was going on at school, but she just wasn't being taught in a way that she could process. Suddenly, Nally had an idea. She told Adara to stay put as she ran to the study. She grabbed a piece of paper and pen and put Adara back on her lap. She placed the paper and pen in front of Adara and asked her to show her. The moment she put the pen into her little girl's hands, the shocking truth finally came out. These weren't the numbers the teacher had been writing on the board. Nally quickly pulled out her laptop and picked the first site that appeared from her query, Kids Online Math Test. So Nally watched as Adara's interest immediately peaked. Her little hands grabbed the mouse and keyboard. But Nally watched her daughter zoom through the questions like they were nothing. Maybe it was far too easy for her age group. She went back to the search bar and typed a math quiz relevant for her age. Again, Nally watched her daughter make quick work of the test. Curious, she went back to the search bar once more and typed hard online math test. Adara had become visibly more enthusiastic as she stared at the screen. Nellie hadn't seen her so interested in something in a long while. The math problems were hard and way above Nellie's ability. Her daughter began typing at speed. Nellie yelled for her husband. Nellie looked almost scared as her husband approached. With wide eyes, she turned her head to her head in the screen and said, "Look at this." The couple watched in complete amazement as their daughter appeared to solve math equations far beyond their comprehension. What was happening? So when the final result popped onto the screen, Nellie couldn't believe her eyes. Her husband was also left in shock. "Hold on a minute," he said. He grabbed the mouse and typed in one final experiment into the search bar, online IQ test. He opened the page. "Here, honey," he said to Adara. "Try this." It soon became clear that Adara was no ordinary girl. Immediately, they speculated that their daughter wasn't misbehaving or falling asleep because she was bad or because of her syndrome. She was bored because her IQ was really high. But first, they needed to prove it. They made her take a proper test to get a professional opinion. Adara sat at the testing desk, flipping through the pages like someone famished for a challenge. Even the testers that were overseeing everything looked on with wide eyes and stunned expressions. But it was the final number that would blow everyone away. Adara had an IQ of 162. But what did that mean compared to other gifted people? Well, Albert Einstein and Stephen Hawking both had an IQ of 160. But their little girl was a genius. She didn't need medication or a stricter hand. She just needed something to match how smart she was. It wasn't long until the world found out and the Sanchez family were in the spotlight. Adara soared through high school by the time she turned 8. It was like life had waved a magic wand and made the depression disappear. Nellie finally could cry tears of joy instead of misery on behalf of her girl's plight. But now there was also an immense sense of pride as Adara tackled 2 degrees at the same time, one in industrial engineering and mathematics and one in systems engineering. But what was the girl's end goal? While some kids dream of being an astronaut and then move on to other career ideas, Adara had the brains and passion to become one. Universities reached out and offered her scholarships, and countries invited her to visit their science and space programs. She even gave a TED Talk about her plans for future space study. Nellie and her husband watched with beaming smiles as their little girl stood on stage and talked about black holes, mirror theory, and traveling to distant planets. She also revealed her plans for coming inventions, including a smart watch to help parents with children with special needs. And to think the first school was angry because she wouldn't answer what 5x5 was.